A damp, cold atmosphere enveloped the slopes around Clifton Triangle when Eleanor Marsh disappeared in Bristol, a city of 460,000 people situated on the banks of the River Avon. The late autumn night passed under a thin mist, with the wind from the water threading through the rows of old gray stone houses. At 9:32 p.m., her friend Lucy Harland stood at the second-floor window on Hotwells Road, waving goodbye as Eleanor, 27 years old, holding a gray wool scarf, stepped outside. She said she would walk home to Redland, just over 2 kilometers, a route she always took when the weather was clear and dry. Lucy watched Eleanor's figure pass the last yellow streetlight before gradually fading into the thick fog covering the slope. What happened in the next 47 minutes would haunt Bristol for nearly a decade. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. The late autumn night in Bristol spread a thin layer of mist over the rooftops, stone sidewalks, and winding slopes from Hotwells toward Clifton Triangle, making the entire area seem to sink under the chill emanating from the Avon. The wind whipped through the old brick walls, carrying the damp smell of decaying leaves and moisture from the rain-soaked pavement, lingering in the empty narrow alleys. It was the kind of night where sounds were easily swallowed. Sporadic car noises, solitary footsteps, the closing doors of bars fading completely behind fogged-up glass. Eleanor Marsh left the group of friends' apartment as the gathering ended earlier than planned. She zipped up her coat, slightly bowing her head against the gusts whipping up the slope, then slowly stepped into the darkness. The low rows of houses in Hotwells receded behind her as she headed toward the Triangle area, where yellow lights slid long across the wet pavement, reflecting in distorted shimmering strips. A few passers-by hurried past, too rushed to notice anyone. At the stone steps leading to the main road, a convenience store camera captured her in a flash, a figure in dark clothing, head slightly bowed against the wind, a gait familiar to anyone who had met Eleanor at the end of the day. The lens, splashed by rain, created blurred halos distorting the movement, leaving the image as just an outline blending into the night background. She continued along the triangle, streetlights growing sparser, the space widening, then narrowing as the road branched into residential areas leading to Redland. At a street corner, a residential camera flashed for a few seconds, just catching her shadow passing the edge of the frame before vanishing into the darkness between 2 lampposts. No subsequent images showed where Eleanor had gone, where she stopped, or if anyone approached her. The next morning, at her workplace, people noticed her desk untouched from the day before. No messages, no emails, and her phone out of office hours was inactive. Eleanor's family, who maintained the habit of texting each other every evening, began to worry when repeated calls went unanswered. They tried again at noon, then in the afternoon, each time hoping to hear her voice. When the sun set on another day with no response, unease turned into clear fear. The family decided to call Avon and Somerset police and report that Eleanor Marsh was missing. The missing person report from Eleanor Marsh's family was forwarded to the Avon and Somerset control room in the early evening, at a time when the duty office had begun shifting to the rhythm of handling emergencies. The call handler needed only the first few sentences: a young woman unreachable all day, not showing up at work, no response to any calls or messages, to realize this was not a typical late arrival. Following protocol, the handler reassured the family, while recording every basic detail: last contact time, recent health status, travel habits, and possible reasons Eleanor might have changed her plans. Each piece of information was entered immediately into the missing persons database to prepare for risk assessment. When the call was transferred to the duty officer, a preliminary description of Eleanor appeared on the screen, and just a few minutes of review were enough for the officer to decide to escalate the alert. Eleanor was an adult woman, living independently, with no history of running away or sudden habit changes. Her loss of contact for 24 hours, especially after traveling alone at night, was a concerning sign. Moreover, the timing coincided with bad weather, empty nighttime streets, and hilly terrain, factors often classified as heightened risk. The rapid response protocol was activated. Eleanor's file was updated to high-risk missing person status, meaning investigative resources would be mobilized immediately, even without specific evidence of crime or accident. The duty officer notified the night shift supervisor, who had authority to form a temporary investigation team within an hour of the report. In the downstairs office, a whiteboard was pulled out, Eleanor Marsh's name written at the top, with 3 blank bullet points below for information to be gathered in the first 24 hours. The supervisor requested the most basic data, information any missing person investigation needs to avoid missing the golden window. First, full identification details. Height, build, hair color, clothing worn when leaving friends. Next, contact information, phone number, mobile network, last recorded device activity, then recent behavior, mood, work schedule, personal plans on the day of disappearance. The supervisor also asked the family for the most recent photos of Eleanor for identification purposes in case a public appeal was needed. As the initial information was added to the file, the supervisor set up the initial investigation team of 4, a lead coordinator responsible for compiling information from various sources, an investigator handling contact with family and friends, a data specialist preparing requests for phone signal data, card transaction history, and public data sources. Finally, an officer tasked with checking urgent details like nighttime public transport schedules, accident or incident reports in the area. Each received specific tasks, required to start immediately that night without waiting for the next day. The supervisor also activated the first 24-hour checklist, a standard list to ensure no commonly helpful information was overlooked in narrowing time or area. It included items like checking for unusual bank account activity, compiling a list of recent contacts, and preparing requests to preserve public camera data before overwriting. As the brief meeting ended, the clock in the duty room had ticked into later hours, but the team knew that from this point, every passing minute increased the risk of losing Eleanor's trail. The supervisor temporarily closed the electronic file with a red highlighted status line, priority case, immediate action required. None of them knew that this decision, simple but procedural, would become the foundation for the entire subsequent investigation. Immediately after Eleanor Marsh's file was prioritized, the investigation team's first task was to reconstruct all possible movements from the moment she left her friend's apartment in Hotwells until the time she should have arrived in Redland. With no specific data on where she stopped or turned, the team had to start with a purely spatial model, based on Bristol's terrain and typical pedestrian habits at night. On a large map spread out in the temporary meeting room, the coordinating officer marked the friend's apartment location with a pen, then drew a continuous line toward Clifton Triangle, the busiest traffic area along that route. From Triangle to Redland, there were 3 main approaches, each with distinct characteristics making them all plausible choices for Eleanor. The first route ran along Queen's Road, then continued onto White Ladies Road, a main road with steady traffic, continuous street lighting, and the most direct, predictable path for walking. This was considered relatively safe, suitable for someone used to traveling alone at night. The second route started from Triangle, but turned into Park Place, then wound up narrow slopes toward Cotham Hill. This was slightly shorter, but had many poorly lit sections, rough stone steps, and limited visibility due to closely packed houses. Someone wanting a shortcut or to avoid traffic noise might choose this. The third route looped deeper into Clifton Village residential area, then followed smaller roads into Redland from the west. Though not the most common choice, its flatter terrain and less traffic made it more comfortable for many nighttime walkers. After identifying the 3 main routes, the team focused on intersection points, locations where Eleanor might have turned last minute or changed due to weather, mood, or others on the road. 3 major crossover points were circled in red: the curve around Berkeley Square, the intersection of Park Row and Woodland Road, and the cluster near White Ladies Gate Church. Each had unique features, some open and bright, some with crisscrossing alleys, others with prolonged shadows from tree canopies. In the next step, the team marked spatial risks, unlit stretches, narrow stairways, paths leading to less frequented areas, and spots typically empty of vehicles at night. Bristol's hilly structure with interwoven small roads easily created natural blind spots, areas with restricted visibility, even under streetlights, and sounds quickly muffled by wind from the gorge direction. Particular attention was given to the area bordering Triangle and the start of Redland Road, where buildings blocked light into long dark patches, plus side paths down to parking lots or shop back alleys. These sections were marked in orange, indicating medium to high risk. Officers also noted points where pedestrians typically slowed, curves, steps, slippery or steep sections, ideal for any unexpected situations. Terrain elements like dense greenery, high stone walls, or construction-obscured roads were included in the model, not to conclude anything, but to understand the spatial context Eleanor might have passed through. Once all geographic data was entered into the investigation team's simulation software, an initial route reconstruction model was formed. This model didn't provide answers, but created a framework showing all possible movements in the time from Hotwells to Redland, including lighting levels, pedestrian frequency, risk per segment, and all potential turns she might have taken. The team would rely entirely on this model for next steps, as only by understanding the spatial picture of the night Eleanor vanished could they hope to find where she deviated from her normal route. The collection and analysis of camera footage was deployed immediately after the route model was finalized, as it was the only data source capable of recording Eleanor's actual movements on the night she disappeared. Assigned officers visited every shop still open that evening, bars, pubs, and homes, with outward-facing cameras, while urgently requesting the Traffic Camera Management Department to extract all remaining footage before automatic overwriting. In 2013, image storage wasn't standardized like today. Each device had different overwrite cycles, sometimes just 24 or 48 hours, so the team raced against time, not only to find data, but to ensure initial copies weren't overcompressed, losing details. In the analysis room, small hard drives and USBs were numbered and lined up on the table, each video segment opened in spatial sequence, starting from Eleanor's departure point, then progressing through assumed paths in Hotwells' Clifton Triangle and up toward Redland. A convenience store camera near the bottom of Hotwells' slope was the first marker. Despite low quality, analysts recognized Eleanor's figure appearing for a few seconds, familiar gait and dark coat matching family descriptions. Nothing unusual here, few passers-by, wet roads from rain, wide angle confirming she was still alone. Moving to footage from a pub near Triangle, images grew grainier from condensation on the lens, but the team identified her passing on the left frame edge, small and blurry, but enough to confirm last moving frames. The final moment cameras captured likely direct movement related to her. This was marked as a key milestone in the event chain, though providing no further details beyond her continuing in the predicted direction. Residential cameras provided patchier data, some captured only half the street, others angled toward parking or partially blocked by branches. In one video from an apartment balcony on a side road near White Ladies Road, analysts saw a blurry silhouette believed to be Eleanor, or at least a woman of similar build, crossing a dark patch between lamps. The angle was too distant for positive ID, but movement aligned with the first route assumed in the model. At a nearby intersection camera, while Eleanor wasn't clearly visible, the team noted a dark-colored hatchback stopping briefly before proceeding. Nothing showed the car interacting with any pedestrian, but its timing matched Eleanor's predicted passage, so the segment was flagged for later review. Other cameras in Triangle and branches toward Cotham Hill captured no clear images of Eleanor. Most were rain-blurred low frame rates stretching or distorting motion, while streetlight reflections on wet pavement made small or dark objects blend into the background. Some videos showed evening pedestrians, but none matched described clothing or build from initial cameras. The team also discarded overly noisy or compressed images unusable for further processing. When compiling all footage, it formed a fragmented movement chain for Eleanor: brief appearance in Hotwells, then near Triangle, followed by a blurry silhouette on the approach to Redland. Gaps between appearances were significant, consistent with terrain and sparse camera density in Bristol at the time. In all videos, no segment clearly showed her face or anyone accompanying her, except a few noisy frames where zooming only pixelated further. For the dark hatchback appearing in 2 segments, old systems lacked resolution for license plates, even model or exact color, just a dark mass passing under low yellow lights, sometimes obscured by tree shadows. The final conclusion from this camera analysis phase was recorded internally. Many videos collected but quality insufficient for person identification, plate or vehicle details, and no clear actions directly tied to Eleanor's disappearance. Cameras provided only one thing: the last time Eleanor appeared on the street, plus sporadic presence of an unidentifiable dark vehicle. Everything else remained sunk in the darkness between frames that Bristol's technology at the time couldn't fill. After completing the camera analysis and identifying the discrete movement milestones of Eleanor on the night she disappeared, the investigation team immediately proceeded to the next step in their rapid response plan: searching the scene within a 2 kilometers radius based on the route map constructed in the previous section. This process required scanning the entire real-world space to check for the possibility that Eleanor encountered an incident on her way home, while also collecting any signs that could assist in reconstructing her journey. The search teams were divided into multiple small groups, each responsible for a sector in expanding fan-shaped layers, starting from the last point where a camera captured Eleanor's figure near the triangle. The first layer focused on areas that a pedestrian would definitely pass through: main roads, sidewalks, and the paths leading up to Redland with moderate traffic density. This layer was handled quickly by the patrol team because the terrain was open, lighting was adequate, and there were few places to conceal objects. No group discovered anything unusual beyond ordinary trash and remnants of the previous night's rain. The second layer expanded further, including dimly lit steep road sections, side paths between residential areas, and stone staircases tucked in the gaps between rows of houses. These spots were often obscured by overhangs or tree shadows, areas the investigation team assessed as higher risk because incidents could occur there with few witnesses. The search team used high-powered flashlights to illuminate every nook and cranny, checking each step, every wall recess, but found no belongings or signs of impact. The previous night's rain had left the ground damp, erasing any faint traces that might have existed. The third search layer brought forces to the Brandon Hill area, one of the most complex terrains within the search radius. The park was expansive, with numerous trails, grassy areas, bushes, and paths leading up and down toward the city center. In many previous missing persons cases, Brandon Hill was thoroughly swept due to its secluded terrain and many areas covered by large tree shadows. The investigation team deployed detection dogs for support, starting them from the last point Eleanor was recorded, then following the route she most likely took. The dogs quickly moved along the first trail, then veered uphill on signals from their handlers, but after just a few hundred meters, the scent they were trying to follow was diluted by the wind and expanding terrain, causing them to lose the trail completely. Multiple times, the dog handling team returned to the starting point and tried different branches, but the results were the same. The scent weakened until it vanished. This was not unusual, as the damp weather and strong winds from the gorge direction often dispersed scents very quickly, especially since the incident had occurred many hours before the search was deployed. After Brandon Hill, the team expanded the scope to trails leading down near the edge of the Avon River. The terrain in this area was complex, with narrow steep paths, old railings, and some trail sections close to the cliff edge. Although the likelihood of Eleanor voluntarily going down to this area without a clear reason was low, the search team still had to check because no pedestrian route within the 2 kilometers radius could be overlooked. All trail sections were illuminated with flashlights. Every small detail like tissues, bottle caps, or any object potentially related was noted. But nothing matched the family's description of Eleanor. There were no signs of slipping, no fabric tears, no personal items left behind. The damp wooden railings showed no fresh signs of impact. As the next sunset approached, the search team continued expanding along the riverbank, the endpoint of the initial search radius. Although the Avon flowed slowly at that time with low water levels, the team found no objects or related signs. They noted the information gap. There was no evidence that Eleanor deviated from her usual walking route toward the river. Ultimately, after a long day sweeping the entire area in 3 search layers, the investigation team reached a provisional conclusion. There was no physical evidence related to Eleanor within the 2 kilometers radius from the last confirmed camera sighting of her figure. The absence of any traces did not mean ruling out any possibilities, but it indicated that if something had happened on her way home, its signs did not exist in the most visible locations. This was an important conclusion, but it also widened the investigative space in a way the team had anticipated but not hoped for. When the 2 kilometers radius scene search yielded no specific traces, the investigation team moved to the next step, collecting witness statements in the area Eleanor was believed to have passed through. This work began with door-to-door knocks along the 3 main routes, then expanded to pedestrians, taxi drivers, store employees and residents near the Triangle area that evening. Among the first to contact the police was a middle-aged woman, living in a second-floor apartment, overlooking the area where Eleanor was last recorded in the pub camera. She reported seeing a young girl wearing dark clothing, walking alone at a time matching the footage analysis results, but she couldn't clearly remember which direction the girl turned afterward, because the streetlights were dim, and it was drizzling steadily. She could only describe a quick pace and slightly bowed head, which relatively matched the image the analysis team had seen, but provided no new details. The second witness was a man in his 30s working the night shift at a store near the intersection of the 2 routes leading up to Redland. He recounted hearing sounds of an argument coming from the slope direction around the same time, a female voice and a male voice. But the echoes in the damp, cold air made it impossible for him to hear the content clearly. He also didn't see the 2 people, only hearing it briefly while closing the store. This detail prompted the investigation team to note it, but unable to confirm its relevance due to no matching visual evidence. The third witness came forward when a late-night food delivery driver stopped by the police station to provide information. He said he saw a dark-colored hatchback parked close to the curb near the Triangle for a few dozen seconds before turning away. He remembered this because the car turned on its headlights and then off immediately, annoying him as the light shone directly into his face. However, he didn't see anyone inside and didn't notice anyone standing near the car. Although this detail coincided with the appearance of the dark car in the footage, it still couldn't establish a connection between the car and Eleanor. A taxi driver was also noted as having passed through the area at a similar time, but when questioned, he said he didn't see anyone matching the police description and didn't recall any unusual incidents. Inconsistencies among the statements began to emerge clearly as the investigation team entered all the information into a comparison table. The first witness saw a woman walking alone, consistent with the footage. The second heard an argument, contradicting the alone detail. The third saw the dark car stop, but didn't see anyone appear in the area. The time frames provided by the witnesses all fell within the marked window when Eleanor might have passed, but the discrepancies in their accounts were too great to reconstruct a logical sequence. The investigation team set up a credibility analysis table, considering factors like observation position, lighting conditions, distance, and memory reliability in a late-night situation. The first witness had a direct view, but from a distance. The second had audio information but no visuals. The third had a car description but couldn't confirm its relation to any pedestrian. Each detail could be partially accurate, but also completely independent and unconnected. When the investigation team tried to align the statements with Eleanor's appearance timing in the footage, they realized the overlap was only relative. No one saw her meet anyone else. No one could confirm the female voice in the argument was Eleanor's, and the dark car might have just been passing by coincidentally. Every attempt to create a unified model from the statements led to unfillable gaps. The final witness comparison report stated clearly, no witness evidence is sufficiently reliable to determine a specific event occurring during the victim's movement. The details obtained are only fragmented and cannot form a verifiable chain of events. This was an important but limiting conclusion, forcing the investigation team to accept that witness information, though necessary, provided no clear direction regarding Eleanor's disappearance that night. When the witness statements failed to provide a clear direction, the investigation team shifted focus to another data source considered key in missing persons cases: Eleanor's mobile phone signals on the night she disappeared. However, analyzing phone data in 2013 was far from straightforward compared to later years when data was stored more comprehensively and positioning systems were improved. The technical team began by sending an urgent request to the mobile network provider to extract activity logs for Eleanor's phone number in the 48 hours before the family reported her missing. The received records included connection logs to cell towers, the timing of the last messages and calls, but contained no GPS data because Eleanor's device was an older smartphone model without real-time location tracking enabled. The provider confirmed that the phone last connected to a cell tower near the edge between Clifton Triangle and Redland. However, this tower's coverage area was quite broad, extending over many residential areas and steep routes, making precise device location nearly impossible. Cell tower positioning technology in 2013 worked on the principle of coverage radius rather than coordinates. Thus, the phone could be anywhere within a hundreds of meters radius that the system could only describe as a general area. The provider also supplied a list of nearby towers the phone might connect to if Eleanor moved further, but the logs showed no additional handovers after the final signal. This meant either the phone was turned off, lost power, or moved to a no-signal location after the last recorded time. The investigation team attempted deeper analysis by reconstructing coverage maps for each tower on Bristol's terrain, especially steep areas and residential zones surrounded by tall buildings that weakened signals. From these results, they created a wide fan-shaped coverage overlay covering most of the area Eleanor was expected to walk home through. Although this model was useful for visualizing the general scope, it didn't bring the team closer to any specific conclusion. Because the coverage was too large, the final signal couldn't be seen as a journey endpoint, but only as a suggestion that Eleanor was still moving on a reasonable route before the phone stopped connecting. Another effort involved retrieving any background data that might exist on Eleanor's device, including Wi-Fi location history or apps capable of recording coordinates. However, Sylvia, the investigator handling data, confirmed that apps on Eleanor's phone did not use automatic location saving, and the phone had no tracking services activated. This was not unusual for 2013 but made digitally reconstructing her journey nearly non-existent. The technical team also checked the possibility of sending a ping test, but since the phone had been off or inactive for many hours, all attempts yielded no results. In an enhanced effort, police re-swept the entire search area for Eleanor's physical phone, based on the hypothesis that if an incident occurred, the device might have fallen on the road or been left in a secluded spot. They used small signal detectors and had search teams probe under bushes, drains, public trash bins, and low areas along the slopes with poles. However, there were no signs the phone had been present in those areas after losing connection. The failure to find the device, combined with no GPS data, forced the investigation team to face an uncomfortable conclusion: the phone could not provide any practical investigative direction. The final cell tower signal only told them Eleanor was in a broad hundreds of meters area, encompassing countless roads, narrow alleys, and paths she might have taken. From a technical perspective, all phone information left was at the level of present in the area, without any indicators of route change, contact with strangers, or unusual signs. The technical department's report concluded, cell tower data at this stage provides insufficient granularity for positional determination. A short sentence, but full of the helplessness of that era's technology. The effort to find answers from the phone, which seemed like it would open a clear path, ultimately only added another layer of blur to the already detail-lacking picture of Eleanor's journey on the night she disappeared. After ruling out tracking via Eleanor's phone, the investigation team shifted focus to the only remaining lead from the camera analysis. The dark-colored hatchback appearing in two different footage segments near the area where she was last recorded. Although the images were too blurry to identify the license plate or make, the car's silhouette was distinctive enough for the team to consider it a potential clue. The tracing process began by estimating the vehicle type through overall shape, rear door slope, roof height, and taillight cluster shape, all examined by enlarging frames without excessive pixelation. Despite the low footage quality, the analysis team determined it was almost certainly a common UK hatchback model from 2010-2013, with high likelihood being a Ford Focus, Vauxhall Astra, or Hyundai i30. From there, they sent a request to the DVLA for a list of all vehicles of these three models registered in the Bristol area, filtered by dark color. The returned list totaled 214 vehicles, a number too large for manual review, but still narrowable through elimination analysis. The investigation team began filtering by cross-referencing registration locations and declared overnight parking spots. Vehicles registered in areas far from Eleanor's route were prioritized for removal, since completely ruling out owners traveling to other areas was impossible. The team still needed to focus on higher probability cases. The list dropped to 97 vehicles. Next, they checked MOT history and insurance for each to identify which were likely operational on the night Eleanor disappeared. Vehicles without valid insurance or reported in garages at the time were further eliminated. After this step, the list shrank to 52 vehicles. With the number significantly reduced, the investigation team continued scrutinizing each by checking intersection cameras and auxiliary data sources like limited 2013 ANPR reports. Some intersection cameras recorded vehicles passing in the evening, but none matched the footage silhouette. Moreover, ANPR coverage and quality in 2013 were insufficient to conclude any vehicle was in the Triangle or Redland area at the exact time Eleanor passed. After reviewing additional private cameras in a wider area, the team retained only 30 hatchbacks on the list because they couldn't be excluded based on available data. For the remaining 30 vehicles, police contacted owners to inquire about usage on the night Eleanor disappeared. Some owners said they were home all evening, others were driving elsewhere, and a few couldn't remember precisely due to the time elapsed. There were no suspicious signs, no clearly contradictory statements. More importantly, no camera evidence proving the footage car was one of these 30. Recognizing further narrowing without additional data was futile, the investigation team had to note the status as open but unavailable lead. A familiar concept in investigations, a theoretically valuable clue, but lacking elements for next steps like searches, surveillance, or vehicle sampling. In the internal summary report, the analyst wrote, "The dark-colored hatchback, despite appearing at a notable position and time, cannot be identified using available data. Insufficient legal or technical basis to view any vehicle on the narrowed list as a direct suspect." This left the entire investigation team in a deadlock. The car was the only lead with spatial connection to Eleanor's disappearance timing, but it lacked too much data to prove real investigative value. Continuing to pursue it at this point would only waste resources. Nevertheless, the team kept a copy of the remaining 30 vehicle list in the file, with the note, "Retain for cross-reference if new data emerges." Although it didn't create a breakthrough, this was still seen as an important part of the process, as it completed the picture that all exploitable leads at this stage had been examined to the maximum extent. When the lead on the dark-colored hatchback reached a dead end, the investigation team moved to the next step in the standard procedure, examining all of Eleanor's personal relationships to determine whether her disappearance was connected to any conflicts or private situations. This was a mandatory step to rule out internal possibilities before moving on to more complex hypotheses. First, the police worked with Eleanor's family, who described her as an independent person, but one who maintained close ties with relatives. They confirmed there were no issues of discord, arguments, or signs that she was experiencing particular stress in the recent period. The family's communication log also showed that she responded regularly and had never disappeared without reason before. The fact that she did not answer her phone all day was so unusual that they immediately reported it to the police instead of waiting. No one in the family was placed in the category of having a motive to harm her, and their background checks were completely clean. Next, the investigation team worked with Eleanor's boyfriend, who currently lives and works in Bath, but occasionally travels to Bristol. He provided clear alibi evidence for the night Eleanor disappeared, including receipts from a restaurant, location data from his phone, and statements from friends who met him at that time. Additionally, their relationship was described by friends as stable, with no signs of tension, prolonged arguments, or a recent breakup. Many messages between them in the days prior showed normality and intimacy, with no content indicating she was upset or intending to leave. After further reviewing the most recent contacts on Eleanor's phone before the device was turned off, the investigation team found that conversations with her boyfriend were consistent, transparent, and completely unrelated to any unstable events. The investigation team continued to expand the scope to Eleanor's close friends, including those who attended the gathering on the evening she disappeared. They all confirmed that Eleanor left her friend's apartment in a normal state, not intoxicated, not upset, and without mentioning meeting anyone else afterward. They provided the time she left and confirmed that no one accompanied her down to the street. Some even provided the police with group messages sent earlier that day, all related to the meetup plans and containing absolutely no unusual signals. The investigation team also checked Eleanor's work relationships, as workplaces sometimes give rise to conflicts that are hard to detect. At the office, colleagues described Eleanor as calm, efficient in her work, and not involved in any internal conflicts. There were no complaints, no disputes, no grievances from management or staff. Her work schedule in the weeks prior was confirmed as stable. She had just completed a small project, and colleagues also mentioned that she planned to take the weekend off to visit friends. No one recalled any argumentative conversations or unusual behavior at the office. When further reviewing her social media, the investigation team noted that Eleanor was moderately active, did not post negative content, did not interact with suspicious strangers, and did not engage in contentious arguments. Her private messages, which the family permitted access to, showed she maintained a stable lifestyle, with no debts, no involvement with any high-risk acquaintances. The investigation team compiled all the data and created a table analyzing potential motives, marking each relationship by risk level. The results showed that nearly all of Eleanor's relationships were at the no-risk level, with no one having the capability or motive to harm her. The internal report concluded, no personal conflicts, emotional tensions, or workplace disputes detected. No evidence suggesting involvement of family, boyfriend, or colleagues in the victim's disappearance. This allowed the investigation team to completely rule out the possibility that the origin of Eleanor's disappearance stemmed from her personal relationships. However, this elimination also made the investigation direction more vague, as there was no longer a group of close suspects to examine in depth. With the social and personal relationships fully reviewed, the team had to accept that Eleanor's disappearance could not be explained by familiar motives within the scope of her private life. When all of Eleanor Marsh's personal relationships had been reviewed and ruled out, without revealing any new leads, the investigation team was forced to confront the overall picture of the initial phase, a missing person case with no physical evidence, no tangible clues, no reliable witnesses, and no route clear enough to reconstruct in a verifiable way. All they had were 3 blurry footage segments capturing Eleanor's silhouette in disconnected locations, a dark-colored hatchback that could not be identified, and a series of statements containing many inconsistencies, lacking overlapping points, and unable to be pieced together into a unified chain of events. No personal items were found within the search radius. No signs that Eleanor deviated from her usual route. No indications of a struggle or incident on the road, and no technical data from the phone that could assist in pinpointing the final location. Every source of information returned to a state of blurriness, much like the fog that covered Bristol on the night she disappeared. Present, but not dense enough to see through. The analysis department attempted to reconstruct a plausible route model based on the starting point, the 3 identified paths, and the average time needed to walk back to Redland, but the lack of transitional data meant the model could only provide a broad time window, unable to confirm which route she took or where she stopped. Every hypothesis proposed could be refuted simply by the absence of evidence. The team's internal reports began to show a worrying repetition: insufficient data to verify, cannot rule out but no evidence to support, no indicators leading to a specific suspect, and unable to determine the endpoint of the route. These conclusions, when taken individually, were just part of the process, but when placed side by side in the file, they formed an overall picture of stalemate. Eleanor's disappearance seemed to occur in a blind spot, both figuratively and literally, where cameras could not see, witnesses could not see clearly, sounds were not distinct enough to differentiate, and 2013 technology could not supplement what the human eye missed. Efforts to expand the investigation to neighboring areas also yielded no results. No suspicious incidents were reported that night. No strangers were noted moving unusually. No emergency calls in the area related to arguments or strange noises. Even hospitals were checked, in case Eleanor had an accident, but without identification. All negative. The investigation team faced a difficult choice: either continue pouring resources into a case completely lacking direction, or officially conclude that the initial investigation process had reached its limit. The supervisor of the Missing Persons Unit convened a final meeting to review progress. All feasible leads had been checked to the maximum extent possible. At that stage, cameras, reviewed witnesses, interviewed, phone, analyzed routes, modeled area, searched. Not one provided data strong enough to advance the case. The meeting ended with consensus. Eleanor Marsh's missing person case was classified as no lead progression, no viable investigation direction, despite full implementation of standard steps. Per Avon and Somerset police procedure, such cases would be temporarily closed at the active investigation level and transferred to the cold case unit for long-term monitoring, awaiting new data or technological advancements. Eleanor's family was informed that, although the file was not fully closed, the chances of finding answers in this phase were very low. The officers also explained that moving the case to cold case status was not abandonment, but recognition that everything possible at the time had been done, and a new element was needed to break the silence surrounding the disappearance. The official file was transferred with the final note: no physical evidence, no identified suspect, no verifiable route model, unable to conclude what happened after the victim was last seen. In the system, Eleanor Marsh's case entered a state of suspension, not an end, but a long pause that no one could predict how long it would last. Eleanor Marsh's file, after being transferred to the cold case unit, continued to exist in the system as an unsolved case, but never considered fully closed. Throughout the period from 2014 to 2021, every time investigative technology improved, or during periodic review campaigns within the force, her file would be reopened once more, with slim hopes that technical innovations or new approaches could illuminate the gaps that the initial investigation could not fill. In 2014 and 2015, the reviews were more administrative than technical, mainly to ensure that data retention requests had been properly completed and to update information if any new community contacts emerged. But since no additional clues appeared in the case, the evaluation reports repeated the initial phase conclusions: no new information to restart active investigation. By 2016, when part of the budget was allocated to upgrading the force's image analysis system, the cold case unit decided to include all 2013 footage in the re-examination list. The goal was to determine if new contrast enhancement and noise filtering technology could improve image details enough to identify the vehicle or subject. Each video segment was converted to the new standard, brightened, color-balanced, and processed with noise reduction algorithms to clarify edges and motion. However, the original cameras had too low resolution. Many segments were just crudely digitized analog video, making it impossible for modern systems to recover details that never existed. Eleanor's silhouette in the pub video remained just a dark mass moving quickly, and the hatchback in the intersection footage continued to be blurry to the point where it was impossible to distinguish door edges from light reflections. The 2016 report stated clearly, "New technology does not improve identification value due to source quality limitations." 2017 and 2018 were a period when the force focused on digitizing and standardizing files, so Eleanor's case was only reviewed at the document level, updating victim descriptions, tagging data to new standards, and rechecking camera retention forms. No breakthroughs from these steps. But in 2019, when the first AI enhancement algorithms were deployed for testing in image analysis, the cold case unit once again included Eleanor's case in the test group. This time, they used deep learning models capable of predicting outlines to reconstruct blurred object shapes, hoping the algorithm could clarify the hatchback's license plate or at least identify the model. The technical team started with the highest quality footage, the intersection camera segment capturing the brief stop of the vehicle's shadow before it turned. They ran the AI through multiple iterations, each refining the frames by removing noise and increasing sharpness. The results showed assumed outlines but inconsistent. In one processing, the AI identified the rear as similar to a Ford Focus, another leaned toward a Vauxhall Astra, while many other frames were completely unidentifiable. This was not due to model error but to the extremely poor input data, video affected by rain, low resolution, glare from streetlights distorting the vehicle's shape. The system also attempted to reconstruct pedestrian shapes in frames, possibly showing Eleanor, but light noise made the AI unable to produce high-confidence results. After multiple tests, the technical team reported data too noisy for AI enhancement to produce investigatively valuable image models. However, they discovered one important thing, not in the image content, but in the absence itself. When compiling all collected footage by time and space, they realized a gap of about 180 meters on the route leading to Redland, an area completely without cameras in a significant radius. This gap, dubbed by the team as the dead corridor, was the stretch where Eleanor likely passed at the exact time no camera captured any image of her or the surroundings. The dead corridor was not a breakthrough discovery enough to reopen the file in a new direction, but it provided a crucial piece explaining why efforts to identify Eleanor's route always broke off midway. She had entered Bristol's 2013 surveillance blind spot, where all nighttime activity occurred outside the range of any device. In 2020, when an old pub near the Triangle closed and prepared for renovation, the owner found an old hard drive in storage and sent it to the police per old data retention rules. The cold case unit immediately had the drive recovered, hoping it contained footage overlapping Eleanor's passing time. After successfully recovering part of the data, the technical team reviewed each segment, but the results were no different from previous analyses. This pub's camera faced the outdoor area, where lighting was much weaker than existing footage, making pedestrian images just moving bright spots under lamps. Potentially related segments were no sharper than the 2013 cameras. No plates, no faces, no unusual actions. The 2020 report concluded that the new hard drive provided no additional investigative value. In 2021, the case was administratively reviewed once more, mainly to update data standardization under Avon and Somerset Police's new system. The dead corridor was noted again in the file as a key spatial factor, with the annotation that any future investigative efforts, if any, should particularly focus on this area, as it represents the only part of the route where the surveillance system could provide no information whatsoever. 8 years passed, with no new evidence, no technology strong enough to fill the initial blurs. Eleanor Marsh's case remained stagnant in cold case status, a file thickening over time, but never moving closer to resolution. Nearly 9 years after Eleanor Marsh disappeared, the case, which had long gone cold and seemed permanently dormant, was unexpectedly reignited by an accidental discovery in Lee Woods, a vast area stretching along the edge of the Avon Gorge, where trees crowd together into thick canopies and the rugged terrain has left many sections virtually untouched by human footsteps for years. In early March 2022, a team of Forestry England workers was dispatched to Lee Woods to re-inspect trails, clear fallen branches, and survey the forest's condition after a wet winter. The work progressed slowly because the terrain there was far from easy, steep slopes in many places, large tree roots sprawling across the ground, interspersed with small rock crevices hidden under layers of decaying leaves. While moving toward a rarely visited area near the cliff edge, overlooking the Avon River, one of them noticed something unusual. Amid the thick layer of leaf litter was a rectangular metal object, dulled and tarnished, partially buried in the soil and covered in patchy green moss. At first, they thought it was an old toolbox or a container for climbing gear that someone had abandoned. But when the worker kicked away some of the dirt and leaves with his foot, they realized the box had been corroded over time, with numerous dents and warped edges, as if it had been there for many years. Curiosity, mixed with an uneasy feeling, prompted them to decide to open the lid to check inside. The smell of damp earth hit first, but immediately afterward, one of them instinctively stepped back upon realizing that inside was not tools or trash, as expected, but white-gray bone fragments mixed in with decayed material. The small, lightweight bones were so dry that even a light touch produced a cracking sound, along with dark fabric scraps that had almost completely lost their shape, with only a few threads retaining their original structure. A rusted zipper attached to a larger piece of fabric made the worker realize they were dealing with something far more serious than forgotten trash. Immediately, they marked the location and called their supervisor, who then contacted the Avon and Somerset police in accordance with procedures for discoveries potentially involving human remains. When the first police team arrived at the scene, the area around the box had been cordoned off with marking tape. They observed from a distance, avoiding disturbing any details while waiting for the forensics team to take over. The discovery site was several hundred meters from the main trail, requiring nearly 10 minutes of walking through interwoven clearings to reach it. The fact that the box was so deep in the forest raised questions about how it could have gone undiscovered for nearly a decade, but the very structure of Lee Woods explained this. The spot where the box was found was a shallow depression between two low rocks, surrounded by dense undergrowth, with large tree canopies overhead blocking out light and keeping the ground perpetually damp, dark, and hard to see clearly. Additionally, Lee Woods is not an area where people frequently venture deep. Most visitors stick to the main trails near the entrances or stop at viewpoints overlooking the Avon Gorge. The area where the box was located was almost completely overlooked, visited only by those conducting specialized field surveys. When the forensics team arrived, they began by filming the entire scene before touching anything. The box was recorded as a cheap metal type, deformed over time, due to corrosion and pressure from overlying soil and rocks. The lid was still attached, but the hinges were heavily rusted, showing signs of environmental impact rather than recent human interference. Inside the box, the remains occupied most of the space, stacked unnaturally, indicating the body had not been placed intact, but had been compressed, due to the box being much smaller than an adult human size. In addition to the bone fragments, forensics observed several decayed items, a piece of fabric with a pattern faded to the point of being unrecognizable, a large section of cloth that may have once been an outer jacket based on its layered structure, a metal zipper almost detached from the fabric base, and a few small hard objects no longer shaped enough to identify their purpose. The fabric colors had completely changed under the effects of time, making it impossible to confirm by eye what type of clothing they had been. When removing the box and bone fragments from the scene, forensics noted the surrounding soil conditions. The thick leaf litter meant the area had barely changed shape in years, with no signs of recent disturbance. This reinforced the assessment that the box had been there for a very long time. Many bone fragments were highly fractured, but enough structure remained to identify anatomical positions. The forensics team paid special attention to the skull, jaw, and teeth, the most critical elements for identification. When the bone fragments were transported to the police force's forensic laboratory, the specialists quickly began the identification process. In cases of severely decomposed remains, DNA can be severely damaged by moisture and burial time, but teeth, especially molars, tend to survive the most durably. The forensic experts sampled the most intact teeth for comparison with dental records of missing persons in the area over the past decade. Bristol and surrounding areas did not have many missing persons cases lasting more than 5 years, and even fewer with complete dental records. Eleanor Marsh was one of them. Police immediately contacted her family's dentist to obtain X-ray records, including tooth structure, filling locations, and root characteristics. When the comparison results came back, there was no doubt the tooth structure of the remains matched Eleanor Marsh's records exactly, from the filling in her left third molar in 2009 to the small chip on her front tooth from her school days. After nearly a decade without leads, the identity of the skeleton found in the metal box in Lee Woods was conclusively determined. It was Eleanor Marsh. Police recorded this in the file as a major turning point, as it not only pulled the case out of its prolonged stasis, but also confirmed that Eleanor had died long before she was found. The fact that her body was in a metal box, hidden deep in the forest and undiscovered for nearly 9 years, was something that made anyone pause to think. But the truth was clear from the identification results. The search for Eleanor Marsh had reached an entirely new milestone, from an unsolved disappearance to a death confirmed by remains. The next big question would be what brought her body to Lee Woods, and who was responsible for it, but that was for the subsequent investigation stages, not this identification phase. The identification of the remains pulled the Eleanor Marsh case out of its years-long ambiguity, and as soon as the identity was confirmed, the forensics team began the detailed analysis phase of all items recovered from the Lee Woods scene. Their goal was not to fully reconstruct events, but to answer 3 specialized questions: when the body was placed in the box, what environmental conditions it had undergone, and whether there were any physical traces that could link to a specific origin or location beyond the forest. The work started with analyzing the soil, adhering around the box, and in bone crevices. The box's exterior showed signs of prolonged moisture exposure, but the soil inside had a slightly different thickness and color from the natural soil at Lee Woods. The forensics team took samples from 3 locations: soil stuck to the box's exterior, soil from the rock crevice where the box was found, and soil inside the box, compressed among the bone fragments over the long period. Upon comparison, they discovered the internal soil had different mineral composition, higher fine particle ratio, a clearer reddish-brown hue, and significantly more feldspar microminerals than the Lee Woods samples. This led the specialists to suspect the box may have been placed elsewhere before being moved to the forest. They continued cross-referencing with the Regional Geological Database for Bristol, and found significant similarity between the box's internal soil sample and the sandy clay soil commonly found in the Stoke-Gifford area, where the terrain is relatively flat, with many vacant lots near industrial zones. This was an indirect but important conclusion. The box containing Eleanor's remains had likely been in Stoke-Gifford for a time before being brought to Lee Woods. Simultaneously, the forensics team processed the decayed fabric scraps. Due to the nearly 9-year decomposition period, most fabric was reduced to loose fibers or shapeless mats. However, under microscopic examination, the technicians noticed gray-blue synthetic fibers adhered to the fabric that had once been a jacket. These were not fibers from the victim's clothing, but thin, round, uniform nylon strands, the type commonly used in car seat upholstery. Spectral analysis showed the polymer structure very close to the fiber used in certain Ford Focus seat models around 2011. Though not absolutely identifying, this was strong enough to note in the report as a noteworthy physical clue. Eleanor's body had come into contact with the interior of a vehicle with seats made from this synthetic fiber type before being placed in the metal box. This was the first time in the entire case that a physical trace appeared traceable to a specific object or vehicle. During inspection of the box's bottom, the the forensics team found two small plastic pieces stuck near bone fragments. Upon close examination, they recognized them as remnants of plastic cable ties, heavily deformed by time, moisture, and pressure. Notably, the cable tie structure did not match types used by police or official agencies. Instead, it was a common retail type, often sold in small batches at hardware stores or online. The width, serration pattern, and locking mechanism all matched cheap household cable ties. The presence of cable ties in the same environment as the remains was not enough to confirm use on the victim, but forensics assessed the likelihood of them being carried in by wind or hikers as very low. Since the box was in a rock crevice in a hard-to-access spot with virtually no external litter, thus, the possibility that the cable ties were related to body handling was considered noteworthy. Beyond soil and fibers, the forensics team focused on bone condition to determine time of death. The bones in the box had no soft tissue left, but certain features still showed decomposition consistent with a body that died and was hidden in a sealed, moist but not soil-direct environment initially for a short period before being moved. Based on bone mineralization level, brittleness, and deformation of remaining marrow, the experts concluded the time of death aligned with the period Eleanor was reported missing, that is, during or immediately after the night she disappeared in 2013. This ruled out any theories that the victim lived for an extended time before dying. In addition to the remains, the metal box itself was thoroughly analyzed. The alloy, mainly cheap galvanized steel, was corroded from outside in, indicating prolonged exposure to rainwater and humidity before reaching its final position. The box interior had circular rust patches, reflecting water pooling when tilted, possibly during transport. From these rust patterns, forensics confirmed the box had been on a stable surface for a period before settling in Lee Woods. There were no signs the box had been opened after placement in the forest, meaning the body remained intact inside from hiding to discovery. The forensics conclusions were compiled into a report. Eleanor Marsh's remains died around the 2013 disappearance time. The body had been in the metal box in an area with soil matching Stoke Gifford before Lee Woods. Synthetic fibers on clothing indicated contact with car seat interior, likely a Ford Focus around 2011. And household plastic cable ties found in the box were items potentially related to body handling. These conclusions not only established the death context, but also provided the first foundation for tracing the box's journey and what happened to Eleanor on the night she disappeared nearly 9 years earlier. When the forensic report confirmed that the synthetic fibers adhered to Eleanor's jacket scraps were highly likely from seats of a Ford Focus model around 2011, the cold case unit immediately shifted focus to tracing all vehicles of that line registered in the Bristol area at the time of Eleanor's disappearance. This was the first time in nearly 9 years the case had a specific physical lead that could be traced back. And though not direct evidence, it was strong enough to officially open an entirely new investigation branch. The process began by requesting from the DVLA a list of all 2011 Ford Focus vehicles registered in the city and surrounding areas. The system returned a huge number, over 1,000 vehicles. This did not discourage the team, as they expected to narrow it down through multiple data layers. The first step was cross-referencing MOT logs, mandatory vehicle inspection reports in the UK. Technicians reviewed Focuses that had issues with seats, dashboard, or interior, based on the possibility such repairs could relate to seat replacement or reupholstering after an unclear event. They also eliminated vehicles reported as long-term off-road, no longer in use by 2013, or exported dismantled. After the initial MOT screening, the list dropped to about 340 vehicles. The next step was insurance data cross-reference. Vehicles without insurance in 2013 or in SORN status were excluded as inconsistent with the assumption the car was driven on the night Eleanor disappeared. This further reduced the number to nearly 200. In the third screening round, investigators examined mileage logs, annual odometer readings from MOTs. They paid special attention to vehicles with unusual fluctuations, sudden mileage spikes in late 2013 or early 2014, or lower than expected mileage, as if unused during the suspect period. The reasoning was that if a vehicle was involved in transporting Eleanor's body, it might have been used beyond the owner's normal routes or restricted afterward due to fear of discovery. Mileage anomalies were not evidence but helped narrow based on behavior. From here, the list dropped to 78 vehicles. The cold case unit continued with a fourth screening, cross-referencing registration locations of each vehicle with a 2013 Bristol map. They prioritized vehicles registered near where Eleanor was last seen, especially around Clifton, Redland, Cotham, and areas connecting to Stoke Bishop, since forensics suggested the box had been in Stoke Gifford before Lee Woods. Vehicles registered in distant suburbs or outside reasonable travel areas were temporarily set aside. This brought the number down to 41. At this point, investigators examined more complex data, ownership history, transfer frequency, unusual maintenance records. Vehicles sold soon after 2013 were flagged and scrutinized, as selling right after a serious event could be an attempt to erase traces. Some reported stolen or accident damaged were removed, as inconsistent with forensic traces. After cross-referencing, the list narrowed to 12 vehicles. Here, the team applied a more in-depth investigative filtering, examining original seat types by interior code for each remaining focus. They contacted Ford dealers to look up seat product codes to determine which polyester nylon fiber was used in specific models. Forensics had identified a particular polymer structure, so if a vehicle's seats did not use that fiber, it was immediately excluded. After this matching, the list shrank to 5 vehicles. At this stage, investigators checked registration history locations and each owner's connections to key areas: Clifton Triangle, Redland, and especially Stoke Gifford, the area matching the box soil sample. They reviewed each, and 3 of the 5 had owners who lived or worked close enough to those locations to be noteworthy. The other 2 did not fit geographically or had no overlap with Eleanor's path or forensic evidence. For the remaining 3 vehicles, investigators requested deeper cross-references, not for searches, but to complete administrative analysis files under law, including detailed annual MOT history, garage repair reports, and last interior cleaning or detailing before sale or storage. Every detail was scrutinized for any fluctuations in late 2013. One of the 3 stood out from the others. The dark gray 2011 Ford Focus was registered to a police officer, PC Adrian Locke, from the traffic unit of Avon and Somerset Police in 2013. Locke's vehicle had 2 notable features. First, garage records showed the trunk carpet replaced in early 2014, with no clear explained reason. Second, the 2013 registration location was near the corridor between central Bristol and Stoke Gifford, matching the 2 forensic mentioned areas. Though this discovery lacked legal or investigative value yet to formally suspect Locke, the cold case unit noted it as the only vehicle in the entire list of over 1,000 with clear intersections between forensics, geography, and vehicle data. The other 2 had no notable factors or links to the soil sample or fiber type. The final vehicle tracing report stated clearly, 3 vehicles fall within the scope of interest, of which one owned by PC Adrian Locke has the highest match level with forensic data and locations. This was the first result in nearly a decade with clear direction from thousands of possibilities. Only 3 remained, and 1 stood out in a way that could not be ignored. As soon as the 2011 Ford Focus owned by PC Adrian Locke emerged as the vehicle with the highest degree of overlap between forensic and geographic data, the cold case unit immediately opened a specialized analysis branch focused solely on Locke, not to confirm suspicion, but to examine every possible connection he might have within the scope of his professional duties and behavioral history. This is a mandatory procedure for any case where physical evidence might point to a vehicle owned by the force, and Locke's file was re-examined down to the smallest details, from duty rosters and shift reports to any behavioral complaints that had been recorded but not fully resolved. The first step was to cross-reference Adrian Locke's duty schedule during the week. Eleanor Marsh disappeared in 2013. According to traffic unit records, Locke had been working 3 consecutive days leading up to the day Eleanor went missing and was assigned the night shift on the very night it happened. However, when comparing shift sign-in/out times with the force's radio log system, the investigation team discovered an anomaly. Locke was present at the station when he clocked in, but there was no radio transmission from his unit for nearly 2 consecutive hours during the period that overlapped with the time Eleanor was last captured on camera at Clifton Triangle. Within the force, such radio silence can have explanations: poor signal, priority movement, or simply an officer not needing to report if no incidents occur. However, on a night shift, especially in the traffic unit that regularly patrolled major routes, the complete absence of any radio signal for 2 hours was noteworthy. The cold case unit immediately reviewed 2013 patrol vehicle location data, but the positioning system at that time was rudimentary, and not every unit vehicle had GPS. Locke's Ford Focus, being a personal vehicle rather than an official patrol car, had no force-issued GPS. Therefore, the investigation team expanded their search to old traffic cameras, which had intermittent storage in the system. Some cameras no longer had data because the infrastructure had been replaced after 2017. But 2 city analog cameras recovered from physical archives revealed a noteworthy detail. Around 9:40 p.m., on the night Eleanor disappeared, a dark-colored Ford Focus appeared on a camera at an intersection not far from the triangle. The image quality was too low to read the license plate, but the headlight cluster shape and vehicle color matched Locke's model. This was not enough to conclude that the car was his, but it was sufficient to include in the comparison report. When plotted on a map alongside Eleanor's presumed route and the related forensic results from the car seat, this camera became a significant lead regarding the potential presence of Locke's vehicle in the spatial area linked to the disappearance. After analyzing the duty roster and indirect camera evidence, the cold case unit continued examining Locke's behavioral record within the force. They reviewed all complaints and internal notes from the year he joined. Most were unremarkable, except for one report classified as insufficient grounds for investigation from 2011, 2 years before Eleanor's disappearance. At that time, a woman had filed a complaint alleging that Locke, while on duty at a minor traffic checkpoint, had stopped her vehicle without valid reason and asked questions that went beyond professional scope, personal in nature, and making her feel uncomfortable. The record showed that the woman claimed Locke kept the vehicle longer than necessary and stared unusually through the rearview mirror. At the time, Internal Affairs conducted a preliminary review but concluded there was insufficient evidence since it was a one-sided account with no body camera footage, as later became standard. When the cold case unit re-examined it, they deemed this complaint worthy of inclusion in the high-risk behavior category, even though the incident itself did not prove any serious misconduct. But in cold case logic, every behavioral signal matters. Next, the investigation team reviewed garage records related to Locke's Focus. Documents showed that in February 2014, about 3 months after Eleanor disappeared, his car was taken in for a complete replacement of the trunk carpet. The reason listed on the repair invoice was vague: staining, customer requested replacement. This is not unusual for an older car, but the timing and lack of detail drew particular attention from investigators. Because, according to forensics, Eleanor's body had come into contact with the seat of a 2011 Ford Focus and was later placed in a metal box. Replacing the trunk carpet in early 2014 was not direct evidence, but it became an important piece in post-incident behavior that some suspects in other cases had exhibited: altering interiors, excessive cleaning, or replacing parts without compelling reason. To further clarify the behavioral picture, the investigation team examined colleague reports regarding Locke. He was described as quiet, reserved, always meeting the minimum professional standards, but not making a strong impression in the unit. Some former colleagues noted that Locke always preferred working alone, disliked paired patrols, which was sometimes seen as lacking coordination, but did not violate regulations at the time. Additionally, an internal performance review from 2012 noted he was very punctual, but often left the station quickly after shifts, with minimal social interaction with colleagues. This was not concerning behavior by professional standards, yet it helped paint a personal portrait, reserved, preferring control over personal space, and revealing little about habits. As the file analysis phase neared completion, the cold case unit compiled the noteworthy elements. Locke's car matched the exact year and seat type identified by forensics. His 2013 vehicle registration address was between central Bristol and Stoke Gifford. 2 locations matching soil traces. Traffic cameras showed a dark focus near the triangle at the time. Eleanor was last seen. His night shift had an unexplained radio gap. The trunk carpet was replaced in early 2014, and the 2011 complaint indicated behavior slightly exceeding professional norms, though not disciplined. All of this was insufficient to designate Locke as a formal suspect, but it was enough for the cold case unit to note that he was the only individual across thousands of data points with significant overlap between forensics, location, vehicle, and professional behavioral history. The concluding report of the file analysis section stated clearly, PC Adrian Locke is not concluded to be involved in the case, but all current data indicates the necessity to expand cross-referencing of his activities on the night Eleanor Marsh disappeared, particularly regarding the duty gap and the potential appearance of his vehicle in the relevant area. This was the official conclusion, marking Locke's shift from vehicle matching forensics to individual requiring evaluation of movement history at the critical time, a turning point that had not occurred in the entire 9-year cold case process. Once PC Adrian Locke's file and duty records had been analyzed to the fullest extent possible within administrative scope, the cold case unit moved to the pivotal step, cross-referencing all forensic data obtained after discovering Eleanor Marsh's remains with Locke's vehicle, residence, and plausible movement trajectory on the night of the 2013 disappearance. This was not a direct criminal investigation, since there was not yet sufficient legal grounds to place Locke as a suspect, but a technical synthesis to assess the degree of match between physical evidence and factors related to him. The activity took place in a closed briefing room of the Special Investigation Unit, where each forensic piece was placed on a comparison board, like reassembling layers of a map that no one had seen in its full structure for nearly 9 years. First was the comparison of synthetic fibers recovered from Eleanor's jacket fragment. The forensic report determined that the nylon polyester fibers had a uniformly round structure with a polymer ratio characteristic only of certain 2011 Ford Focus seat lines. The investigation team had narrowed all same-year Ford Focuses down to just 3 vehicles. Of these 3, only Locke's car used the exact seat code containing the matching fiber type. When the forensic fiber was examined side by side with a sample from Locke's car seat, the spectral characteristics matched at a near absolute level: infrared peaks, reflectivity, and dye particle distribution in the fiber all aligned. This was not 100% identification evidence, but it was the highest match achievable with this type of analysis. The technical team noted it in the report. Fiber match high likelihood compatibility with upholstery of Ford Focus. Next was the soil comparison. The soil sample, in the box containing the remains, had a mineral composition distinct from Lee Woods, where the body was found, but significantly consistent with soil from the Stoke Gifford area. Based on feldspar particles, reddish-brown color, and fine compaction, forensics concluded the box had been in the Stoke Gifford area for a period before being moved to Lee Woods. When the investigation team reviewed Locke's vehicle records, they noted that in 2013, he lived in Redland, but his car was frequently recorded in Stoke Gifford, where he had family and occasionally visited after shifts. Combined with the 2014 garage data, where Locke's trunk carpet was replaced, the forensic team obtained permission to sample soil from the trunk floor and screw crevices. They found residual soil in the plastic gaps with composition matching the box sample. Still, the characteristic Stoke-Gifford feldspar, the presence of Stoke-Gifford soil in the box containing the remains, in soil adhering to bones, and in Locke's trunk floor formed a chain of matches that had never appeared before in the case. A new layer of convergence began to form. If the fiber led to Locke's car seat, then the soil led to Locke's trunk. From there, the forensic team continued examining the third item recovered from the box, the rotted cable tie. Upon analyzing the plastic structure and serration pattern, they concluded it was a cheap cable tie commonly sold in small batches on e-commerce sites, not the type used by police. This prompted the cold case unit to review online purchase histories of the 3 vehicle owners on the suspect list, but only Locke had a transaction for a matching size cable tie pack in September 2013, just 2 months before Eleanor's disappearance. The sample tie he purchased had the same plastic lock style and serration width as the one found in the box, though forensics could not prove they were from the same production batch. Nevertheless, Locke's purchase of an identical physical product to the item found beside the remains became another data point in the forensic chain. When the analysis team synthesized the 3 layers, fiber, soil, cable tie, they began reconstructing a possible trajectory model. Eleanor disappeared in the triangle area. Forensics showed her body had contact with the rear seat of a 2011 Focus. Soil in the box indicated the remains had been stored for a time in Stoke-Gifford, and movement from Stoke-Gifford to Lee Woods fully fit the time needed to plan concealment before the forest entered the wet winter season of 2013. But the most critical data layer to close the comparison loop was not static forensics, but movement data reconstruction. The trajectory analysis team used all available information: the last camera sighting of Eleanor, possible routes she took, camera blind spots, and the location where remains were found nearly 9 years later. They cross-referenced this with Locke's plausible movement history based on where he lived, worked, and routes he commonly took when driving his personal car after shifts. One notable result emerged: taking the time Eleanor left her friend's apartment and the time the traffic camera captured a dark Focus near the triangle, Locke's car had sufficient time to appear at that exact location. When the model was expanded toward Stoke-Gifford, the shortest route matched the path Locke's Focus regularly took weekly. From Stoke-Gifford to Lee Woods, the route through Abbotsleigh also matched one he had taken when visiting a relative in Long Ashton. When the 3 points, Triangle, Stoke-Gifford, Lee Woods, were connected by the most logical traffic routes for a 2011 Focus, the travel map formed a closed triangle, and Locke's movement aligned perfectly with the forensic model of body transport. Not only did it match geographically, but temporally as well. The 2-hour radio gap in his shift fell exactly during Eleanor's disappearance period. Afterward, there was sufficient time to travel from central Bristol to Stoke-Gifford and then to Lee Woods. The conclusion of the forensic movement comparison section was recorded in the report as follows: fiber match, high likelihood upholstery match with Locke's vehicle, soil match consistent with residue collected from boot interior, cable tie identical type to item purchased by Locke, reconstruction route compatibility between victim disappearance points and known travel patterns of PC Adrian Locke, shows full spatial and temporal consistency. From a case that had been opaque for nearly a decade, the entire forensics had reconnected into a continuous logical chain, but from forensics to proving conduct still remained a long step. When the entire chain of forensics trajectory vehicle data aligned with each other too perfectly to still be considered coincidence, the cold case unit submitted a comprehensive report to command and requested an arrest warrant for PC Adrian Locke as the primary suspect in the Eleanor Marsh case. This was not a decision made lightly. Locke was a serving officer in the traffic unit, never formally disciplined, and arresting an active police officer required sufficiently strong evidence to avoid any procedural errors. However, the degree of evidence overlap had exceeded the threshold allowing delay. The arrest warrant was approved after a closed meeting lasting over 2 hours, held in early June 2022, nearly 3 months after Eleanor's remains were found at Lee Woods. To prevent Locke from having opportunity to destroy evidence or prepare a response, The Special Investigation Team coordinated with the Professional Standards Department to execute the arrest immediately after he finished his evening shift and left headquarters. Security cameras outside the gate captured the moment Locke appeared confused as two officers approached and stopped him, clearly stating, "You are under arrest on suspicion of involvement in the death of Eleanor Marsh. You have the right to remain silent." Locke did not resist, but his expression was not anger or shock. It was an unreadable freeze, as if he did not fully grasp the situation unfolding before him. He was then taken to interview room 4 at Bridewell Police Station, where the formal questioning began. Initially, Locke maintained a calm demeanor, firmly asserting that he did not know who Eleanor Marsh was and was not in the Triangle area that night. When asked about the prolonged radio silence during his 2013 shift, he simply replied that signal was poor back then, and he did not remember exact times after nearly a decade. This attitude was not surprising, as many suspects with law enforcement backgrounds often remain guarded, exploiting any ambiguity to avoid direct answers. However, the interviewers were well prepared. They did not confront immediately, but guided Locke through the timeline piece by piece, deliberately allowing him to provide statements that could be pinned down. Locke stated that on the night Eleanor disappeared, he patrolled in the unit vehicle, did not drive his personal car during the shift, and did not pass through the Triangle area. That was his initial statement, and it immediately created an anchor point for comparison. After letting Locke finish, the interviewers began presenting evidence piece by piece. First was the 2013 traffic camera footage showing a dark Ford Focus near the Triangle at the exact time Eleanor was last seen. They did not say it was his car. They only asked what he thought about such a Focus appearing. Locke replied, "It could be anyone. Focuses were common cars, but when shown an enlarged image of the taillight cluster with features matching the 2011 model, Locke began showing tension. He still denied it, but this denial was more hesitant. Next, the investigation team presented the soil forensic report. They did not state that soil from Locke's trunk matched the box soil. Instead, they displayed 3 soil samples side by side, one from the box, one from Lee Woods, one from Stoke Gifford. Then the interviewer asked, "Can you explain why the soil in the box containing the remains does not belong to Lee Woods, where it was found, but matches the Stoke Gifford area where you frequently visited?" Locke remained silent, then replied, "I don't know. I have nothing to do with that box." That was the key. He had just acknowledged awareness of the box, despite previously claiming no knowledge of the remains. The interviewer noted this inconsistency without comment and moved on to the synthetic fiber analysis. They presented the results objectively, only asking Locke if he knew that the fibers on Eleanor's clothing fragment were nearly perfectly compatible with 2011 Focus seats, the type he owned. Locke replied, "Just coincidence. There were thousands of cars like that." But when the forensic report was detailed further, that only 3 vehicles in the Bristol area used the exact seat code with this fiber, and of those only his car aligned with all forensic intersections, Locke could no longer maintain composure. He began requesting to see a lawyer, but questioning continued within legal bounds, since he had not formally invoked termination of answers. The climax of the interview occurred when the interviewer asked about the September 2013 cable tie purchase. Locke said he bought them to bundle cables in his home garage, but when asked why the type he purchased, same size, same serration pattern, same lock mechanism, appeared in the metal box containing Eleanor's remains, Locke did not respond. He looked down at the table, fingers trembling slightly, but admitted nothing. Afterward, the investigation team presented the trajectory alignment between Eleanor's disappearance route and the path Locke could have taken during the radio gap. They showed the map, Triangle Stoke Gifford Lee Woods. They asked, "Can you explain why the 3 key forensic points, car seat, soil, cable tie, are all located precisely on the only travel axis you could have taken that night?" Locke replied, "I don't remember. I'm not involved. I was just doing my duty." At this point, the interviewer shifted from technical analysis to direct confrontation. "Mr. Locke, no one mentioned duty. We are talking about a box containing the skeleton of a woman missing for 9 years. We are talking about your car, soil in your trunk, fibers on your seats, cable ties you bought, and the route you did not report." Locke was silent for a long time, then only said, "I want to see a lawyer." From that moment, he answered no further questions. But to the investigation team, that silence held more value than any denial. After 3 days of detention under murder investigation procedures, Locke was formally charged with 4 counts: abduction, unlawful imprisonment, murder, and unlawful disposal of a body. When the charges were read, Locke showed no strong reaction. He only stared into space, as if trying to withdraw from the reality closing around him. But even if he remained silent, the case was no longer silent. Everything had crossed the suspicion threshold. Forensics, timing, route, physical evidence, and Locke's contradictory statements had all converged into a chain strong enough to bring him into criminal proceedings. The trial of P.C. Adrian Locke at Bristol Crown Court began in late November 2022, taking place in courtroom number 2, with a level of public interest higher than any case in the city since the previous decade. The prosecutor opened by reconstructing the entire 2013 journey in a detailed reconstruction. Eleanor Marsh left her friend's apartment, crossed Clifton Triangle, disappeared in the 180-meter dead corridor, and never returned. A digitized map was projected on a large screen, clearly showing the camera points that captured Eleanor, the unmonitored blind spots, and the location where her body was finally found nearly 9 years later in Lee Woods. The prosecution then shifted to the 2022 forensic evidence, explaining why the combination of new data and the old journey formed an inescapable logical chain implicating Locke. They presented synthetic fibers taken from a piece of jacket, showing comparison photos between fibers from the crime scene and fibers from Locke's car seat. A materials analysis expert was called, describing in scientific but clear language polymer structure, light refraction index, and dye pattern matching at a high likelihood level, meaning it could be presented in court as strong indicative evidence. Next, a soil science expert was summoned, presenting the analysis process of soil in the metal box, in bone crevices, in the bottom of Locke's trunk, and samples from Lee Woods. A geological map of the city was projected, with the Stoke-Gifford area appearing in its characteristic reddish-brown color palette. The expert pointed out the similarities between the forensic soil samples and soil from that area: feldspar content, fine grain size, and the reddish-brown hue of sandy clay. When the prosecutor asked whether the presence of Stoke-Gifford soil in both the metal box and Locke's trunk could be coincidental, the expert replied, "Very unlikely, unless both objects were in that area during the same period." Then came the forensic pathologist, who presented the decomposition process of remains in a sealed, humid environment. Bone mineralization, structural brittleness, and dental condition, allowing the conclusion that time of death fell exactly on the night Eleanor disappeared. From the prosecution bench, all the forensic points were tied into a continuous thread: fibers car seat, soil trunk, cable tie, Locke's purchase transaction. Decomposition timeline, matching time of death. When the prosecution finished their presentation, Locke's defense lawyer attempted to break the logical chain of evidence by emphasizing, matching does not mean conclusion. They argued that many people own 2011 Ford Focuses, that synthetic fibers are common material, that Locke had legitimate reasons to travel through various areas, that soil in the trunk could come from daily activities. But during cross-examination, Locke himself made the situation worse for his side. The prosecutor drilled into each contradiction. "You say you didn't know Eleanor Marsh. So why, during questioning, did you say I had nothing to do with that box before we even mentioned the box containing the body?" Locke remained silent. The prosecutor pressed on. "You say you didn't drive your personal car during your shift, but 2013 cameras recorded a dark Focus of the same model as yours near the triangle at the exact time Eleanor was last captured on camera." How do you explain that? Locke replied. There are many focuses like mine. The prosecutor immediately shifted to the fiber match. Only 3 focuses in all of Bristol had seats with this exact fiber type. The other 2 are unrelated to your routes, unrelated to Stoke Gifford. Only your car sits at the intersection. Coincidence? The defense objected, but the judge allowed the question as valid forensic comparison. Locke did not answer. The prosecutor continued applying pressure with the timeline. You have a 2-hour radio blackout during your shift. That's enough time to appear at the Triangle, travel to Stoke Gifford, and then take the box to Lee Woods. Do you have another explanation? Locke repeated. I don't remember. The prosecutor did not let up. They presented the receipt for cable ties purchased in September 2013, then asked, you bought cable ties of the exact type forensics found in the remains box. What was the purpose? Locke said, for the garage. The prosecutor rephrased, you normally use cable ties for garage cabling. But why did forensics find identical ties in the box and not in your garage? No answer. The entire courtroom fell dead silent. Locke's lawyer tried to redirect by questioning the accuracy of the forensic timeline, but the decomposition expert responded clearly, the degree of bone mineralization completely rules out death after 2013, meaning Eleanor was not a victim of any later event. She died exactly when she went missing. When the cross-examination ended, the once ambiguous elements in the case had become dense layers of matches, physical forensics, movement patterns, vehicle data, death timeline, and Locke's contradictory statements. The prosecution closed the final day with a statement that left a heavy atmosphere in the courtroom. No single piece of evidence convicts Mr. Locke. But when all 27 forensic pieces and journey data are assembled, they are no longer coincidences. They form a complete picture. The jury listened without looking away, and the entire trial fell silent, awaiting the verdict to be delivered in the final part of the case. The sentence for PC Adrian Locke was handed down on the Thursday afternoon of the trial week. In a packed courtroom at Bristol Crown Court, the jury, after more than 8 hours of uninterrupted deliberation, returned with a unanimous verdict. Locke was guilty of murder, kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and perverting the course of justice with the victim's body. As Judge Grant Ellingham read the sentence, his voice was low but carried unmistakable severity. You abused the authority of a police officer, abused the community's trust, and abused the blind spots in the 2013 surveillance system to commit an act of taking a life that you believed would never be detected. For nearly 9 years, the silence of the case was not evidence of your innocence, but only a reflection of the technological gaps at that time. But justice, though delayed, has fulfilled its duty. Under the ruling, Locke was sentenced to 28 years in prison, with no early parole, and eligibility for sentence review only after serving at least 2/3. The courtroom was silent as he was led away from the dock, eyes fixed on the stone floor, showing no emotion, but no longer maintaining the cold demeanor of someone who once believed he could remain hidden forever in the blind spot of a missing person case, stretching nearly a decade. Following the sentencing, an independent report, compiled in parallel with the trial to assess why the Eleanor Marsh case was delayed so long, was released to the press and submitted to the Home Office. The nearly 140-page report synthesized all the errors and limitations of the 2013 investigation, divided into 4 categories: image surveillance, technical analysis, risk assessment procedures, and journey cross-referencing mechanisms. The biggest error identified was the camera infrastructure at the time. Bristol's 2013 surveillance system had many dead corridors, streets without cameras, especially in the area where Eleanor was believed to have disappeared. Combined with the low resolution of analog cameras, the frames were not clear enough to identify vehicles or individuals, rendering the initial camera analysis unusable. The report carefully noted, the issue was not a lack of investigative competence, but the limitations of technology at the time. The second factor was mobile phone technical analysis capabilities in 2013. Cell tower location technology then could only identify broad coverage areas, not pinpoint where Eleanor's device lost contact. The absence of GPS data, tracking apps, and signal filtering tools made the phone, a key clue source in modern missing persons cases, nearly useless in the initial investigation phase. The report also pointed out that vehicle tracing in 2013 was significantly limited due to the sparse ANPR network, lacking enough capture points to reconstruct the route of the dark-colored hatchback seen near the triangle. If the traffic camera and ANPR systems at the time had been denser and clearer, Locke's 2011 Ford Focus might have been identified early. The third category was missing person risk assessment procedures. The independent report emphasized that Eleanor was classified as high risk relatively late. As in the early stage, authorities still hoped she might return voluntarily or was in a non-urgent situation. This delayed camera extraction, route reconstruction, and expanded searches in the critical first 48 hours, the golden window in missing persons cases. Finally, the report highlighted shortcomings in route and journey cross-referencing mechanisms. In the initial investigation, authorities lacked algorithmic tools to compare Eleanor's possible path with vehicle movements in the area. They relied on manual methods, meaning Locke's Focus was never flagged as suspicious because no data linked it to the victim's path. The report recommended reforms to missing persons investigations in three main directions. First, upgrade urban camera systems, especially in dead corridors, to eliminate prolonged blind spots like those in 2013. Second, apply modern data analysis technologies, AI-enhanced video, next-generation cell site triangulation, and integrated regional ANPR data to all high-risk missing persons cases. Third, improve risk assessment protocols by requiring reassessment of risk level within the first 4 hours, instead of 12 as before. A key highlight in the report was the assertion, if the technologies and procedures available in 2022 had been implemented at a minimum level in 2013, the Eleanor Marsh case could have been solved in weeks, not nearly a decade. The report's conclusion was not just criticism, but a reminder of the long-term reform responsibility of the force to ensure no family waits 9 years for an answer, and no suspect can hide that long, simply due to system gaps. The Eleanor Marsh case closed with a 28-year sentence for Adrian Locke, but its legacy lies in the mandatory changes to how Bristol, and the UK as a whole, approaches missing persons cases in the future. Looking back at the entire story of the Eleanor Marsh case and the nearly 9-year journey to solve it, there is a profound lesson for life in the UK today. Personal safety depends not only on individual choices, but also on the quality of the community protection system, from camera infrastructure, missing persons response mechanisms, to the transparency and integrity of law enforcement. Eleanor's case shows that even in a major city like Bristol, dead corridors still existed, blind spots without cameras where all technological support became meaningless. That is exactly where she vanished from all records in 2013. And those gaps caused the case to stall for nearly a decade. The lesson for the UK community today is don't assume every route is safe just because CCTV is widespread. If you live or frequently travel in areas like Clifton, Redland, or residential zones with narrow roads and low lighting, choosing well-lit, busy routes remains crucial. Not to create fear, but to remind that technology, as in this story, sometimes cannot intervene in time. Additionally, the case underscores the importance of timely response in missing persons situations. Eleanor's family reported to police very early, but the 2013 risk assessment process delayed the initial response. Today, if you're worried about a loved one, trust your instincts and contact authorities as soon as possible. The UK has improved procedures to assess risk within the first few hours, thanks to lessons from cases like Eleanor's. Finally, the story is also a reminder of the responsibility to oversee law enforcement. The fact that PC Adrian Locke, a police officer, abused his position to commit the crime shows that the community must firmly support transparency and internal oversight in police forces. If you witness suspicious behavior from anyone in power, speaking up is essential to protect the entire community. The core lesson from the journey to justice for Eleanor is safety comes not only from the system, but from understanding its limits and actively filling those gaps with vigilance, unity, and community responsibility. Thank you for following the entire journey to solve the Eleanor Marsh case. A powerful reminder that justice, though late, always requires our attention. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue joining stories told with respect, responsibility, and a passion for uncovering the truth. See you in the next video.